We made a special episode about the Hindenburg Line, Germany's flexible defense system built in early 1917. And that has led to a lot of questions from you guys, mostly of the nature of, did it work? Did it keep the Allies at bay? Let's find out. I'm Indy Neidell. Welcome to a Great War special episode about the German flexible defense and how it fared at Passchendaele. If you're not sure how that system worked in general, here's a quick recap. The system was created by Fritz von Lossberg under the orders of Quartermaster General Erich Ludendorff and was called the Siegfriedstellung by the Germans. In contrast to the normal way of packing frontline trenches with soldiers, the Germans used a large area for defense in depth, with layers of pillboxes, bunkers, and machine gun nests in a checkerboard pattern that mutually supported each other in a deep killing zone. For the enemy to achieve a breakthrough, he would have to pass through all of this to reach the main defensive lines, and each point on the way was designed to delay him as much as possible, inflicting constant damage. Artillery and counterattacks would catch anyone in the open. It was a formidable system. It had been effective so far when used properly, but Passchendaele, also known as the Third Battle of Ypres, would be its real testing grounds. Now, the advanced German positions were pretty much entirely destroyed by the preliminary artillery barrage, but the bunkers and pillboxes scattered around the field stood, and their occupants defended themselves against the Allied infantry. Many strongpoints fell, but they inflicted terrible casualties before doing so, and the Allies could only move at a crawl through the boggy, muddy ground, and the defenders stood their ground. But the German defense system wasn't merely passive, it had an active counterattack element. Ludendorff used stormtroop doctrine in his reserves, the Eingreiftruppen. These were highly mobile, heavily armed infantry platoons that were kept out of range of enemy artillery and used as rapid response teams. Unlike stormtroops, though, they were not intended to pierce an enemy's defensive positions, but were to crash into an enemy advance, preferably from the flanks, while that enemy was engaged with the pillboxes, and with light machine guns and grenades would create a mobile defense belt that would ideally strangle the attack or rout the enemy. They were kept in a state of constant readiness, and the real trick was to send them out at just the right moment, when the enemy was most vulnerable. For poor timing could doom the counterattack, so an experienced Hauptmann or Leutnant could even overrule a general's decision in order to get it right. The Eingreif troops also had anti-tank units who used iron core bullets and light artillery to penetrate the machines, and the counter-assault groups were very effective in the first few weeks of the battle, catching the plodding Allied troops off guard time and again and sabotaging their morale. There were problems, though. Mist and smoke favored an attacker, sure, but rain was a defender's friend, so the counterattack certainly had no weather advantage. German artillery was way outgunned by the British, and the batteries couldn't remain in one place for too long without being destroyed, and the terrain was terrible for moving them around. Also, the super heavy British artillery was out of their range. And the Allies were learning. By mid-September, the British began concentrating their artillery fire on the German strongpoints, their main obstacles, and they began to crack under the shelling. They also stopped trying to break through the whole system and began using small bite-and-hold tactics that ran counter to the defense doctrine. Rather than get caught in the killing zone, the British would launch limited attacks that didn't trigger counterattacks and then simply stop and consolidate their positions. Another flaw grew for the Germans. They could not retake captured positions in a consistent line, especially under fire and in bad weather. So there were now always weak spots in their lines for the enemy to exploit. Communications were very difficult and sometimes non-existent. Signal flares for counterattacks got lost in the weather, telephone lines were cut, and runners could take hours to get a message through, assuming that they even made it out in one piece. So the Eingreif troops were now often sent out too late, and the British now knew to expect them anyhow, and had begun shelling the rear areas to harass them and prevent them from arriving. By the end of September, Ludendorff was nervous. These tactics would inexorably throw the Germans out of their positions. He called for the German artillery to aid the Eingreifs in preemptive attacks, but this proved impossible with the conditions of the battlefield. Advancing through the mud, gas, and shelling of the broken land, the men would reach the front exhausted and under strength. The system was failing. But did it fail completely? Well, not really. It never collapsed, mainly, by all written accounts, because of the German soldiers. Months-long shelling, gas attacks, endless bad weather, sickness and exhaustion. By October, sometimes the German defense would be 2 soldiers sharing a water-filled shell hole, or what remained of a trench, fighting off the attackers again and again. This is what Oberleutnant Zussenberg had to say about these soldiers. If I live to be 100, the memories of the days on the Steenbeek will never be extinguished. Here, the true greatness of the defensive battle revealed itself in full. It requires enormous reserves of morale and courage to hold out in muddy shell holes for 7 long days on end, despite bad weather and ceaseless concentrated artillery fire. What each man in his lonely shell hole achieved deserves to be set down in letters of gold in the history of war. The junior officers maintained the cohesion of their troops, forming them into defensive clusters against the endless attacks. It was a struggle of attrition by then, and neither side could keep it up forever. The German High Command changed its strategy, and instead of using soldiers to man equipment, it would use equipment to man its soldiers. Huge amounts of machine guns, grenades, and ammunition were given to the remaining strongpoints to turn each soldier into a personal strongpoint. German High Command simply wanted to hold out until winter would end the fighting. The flexible defense system was indeed formidable, but it was flawed, and though it didn't collapse at Passchendaele, it failed to hold in the end to the minor gains of bite-and-hold tactics. Eventually, a counter to that counter was impossible to find because of the Allied superiority in artillery and aircraft, and as winter rolled in, the Germans would need to find a new defense for the spring. Well, we've all heard again and again the old saying, the best defense is a good offense, and it looked like Ludendorff was going to put that saying into practice. If you want to learn more about the original design of the Hindenburg Line, you can check out our special episode about that right here. We also turned our illustration of that defense system into a great infographic poster, which you can get in our merchandise store. Do not forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram for more background information on the Great War. See you next time.